Tommy, where the fuck did you get that hat? Wow.
Ooh,
I have to check that place out.
that's definitely a Seth hat.
Yeah, big Godzilla fan. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you got your Swamp Thing shirt on, right?
You have Swamp Things on my shirt. It was I had a Kohl's gift card from like Christmas or something, and couldn't find anything that I wanted at Kohl's. Except anytime I see a search bar, I'll type in Swamp Thing just to see, because that's just how I am. And believe it or not, Kohl's actually delivered. They had a Swamp Thing shirt.
Yeah, good for Coles.
Not that kind of podcast. Love that.
Well, everyone's got the right gear on for this. I have my Nekromantik underwear on right now. Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the film podcast that covers the good, the bad, but always the ugly. I'm Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troy.
And today we are joined by AV Forum's Tom Davies to discuss some of the nastiest video nasties of the late 80s and early 90s. The man behind them is German director Jörg Buchardt, who defied state censors with boundary-pushing horror films featuring necrophilia, suicide, castrating Nazis, and more. But is there more to them than meets the severed eye? First up is 1987's necrophiliac cult classic Nekromantik and the 1990 anthology of all things death-related, The Death King. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Hello.
It is so nice to have you. For listeners out there, our guest is Tom Davies, who writes for avforums.com and frequently co-hosts their podcast. Tom, if you just could you tell us a little bit about AV Forums for anyone who's not familiar?
Yeah, sure. So we are a UK-based forum and news site and review site, primarily focused on like the tech side of things, I guess. Not me personally. I am not that savvy in terms of the equipment that people go out and spend thousands and thousands of pounds to play the stuff on. However, that's the focus of the website, and in the past on our podcast we have had guests including Arrow Video's Jasper Sharp, and we talked to our guests on the podcast about the process of mastering and the audio and visual productions on bringing these things that we're talking about today to physical media. I don't know if Arrow Video is as big in the US as it is in the UK, but it's basically the go-to for cult movies at the moment in the UK. And in fact, if you watch either of the movies that we're going to talk about today, you will be probably watching the Arrow release of it.
It's all their fault.
Absolutely. So yeah, we talk about films, TV, but we kind of hit it from like a technical perspective. And there is some interesting technical elements to particularly Der Todesking, the Death King, and Nekromantik that we might touch upon over the course of our conversation today. But yeah, you should go to avforums.com and have a look at the things that I write, have a look at the things that the other guys write. We are majority white, majority middle-aged, majority straight men, which I think you can agree is like an underrepresented demographic in film criticism. So
no, I've never heard of those. So what are they like?
It would be very brave of you to go and check it out, I would say.
Oh my God.
Yeah, another win for diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, All right, so yeah, I was wondering, do you kind of specialize in genre type, movies like this or cult movies? Personally?
Personally, yes. In terms of the things that I end up writing, not really. Because I'm not the greatest font of knowledge in terms of the technical side of things. I tend to get lumbered with the cinema and streaming releases that I write about. So um, I get given all the franchise stuff. And I get castigated week after week for despising basically all the output of anything that is Marvel related or Disney related or and I would
Mm.
much prefer to be writing about the weird occult side of things, because that is definitely where my interests and experience lie, I would say.
Well, we're happy to give you a secret little place to do that.
I
Not
can't
so
wait.
secret. Yeah. You'll blossom. It's time to blossom.
Yeah, you're in good company as far as not being terribly excited by most movies that are in theaters right now. And certainly the ones that we're going to talk about, I can't really imagine seeing in a theater. They seem like movies that you would find, on an old grainy VHS tape somewhere, and kind of wonder if it's a snuff film or what exactly is going on with this. Which is kind of funny because I found these super nice, like HD versions that I watch, which I imagine might be on the Arrow, either Blu-rays or DVDs or
Mm-hmm.
however they were released. And I feel like that doesn't really do these particular movies any favors necessarily.
Yeah, you're almost supposed to find like a VHS on the ground with sticky stuff on it and watch it. But at the same time, I don't know. I guess some cleaning up could be helpful. I watched some rip of it on fdupmovies.com. Uh, Basically, friend of the podcast. I feel like at this point, uh, and but it looked great to me. And it was an Arrow, so let's get a sponsorship from Arrow and fdupmovies.com.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And so, was there something in particular then, Tom, that was that drew you to this as far as suggesting it for the podcast? Because we did have Necromantic on our kind of long list of things to do, which neither of us had seen until now. But you brought up pairing it with the Death King. So is this something like, are you a Necromantic head? Or did this just seem as a just the perfect subject for this particular podcast?
I think the reverse. I came to Necromantic via De Todes King, which was a movie that I had read about maybe, I don't know, like 15 years ago, and I just read the synopsis of it and thought like, nope, this movie's not for me. And uh, coming to it again, I guess we'll get into it later, but like coming to it again later in life and having the opportunity to see it and seeing that and thinking, I can see something here that is like chiming with me, and from there, that was my stepping stone to the work of Yogbuk Great, and yeah, so I think Necromantic is probably like the more uh, more accessible. I don't know. I
That says something about the
Although
Death King, doesn't
I'm a
it?
little on your side in a way, like if I was suggesting for someone to start somewhere, I would actually give them the Death King. I feel like, 'cause I feel like I don't know. You find it eventually in Necromantic if you do hang with it that you see
Mhm.
that like this isn't just like someone throwing something at the wall. There is like some real intent. There is some artistry going on, or at least an attempt at artistry.
Yeah.
Uh, and you very plainly see that from the get-go in the Death King, which is more straightforward in its sort of art house approach. Feels more art house,
Hmm.
where Necromantic, at least on its surface, feels more grindhouse snuffy and like trying to push you out of the room as quickly as possible with everything that it's doing.
And
uh
I think I'm always attracted to stuff that is like no budget movie making as well. Like
Me too.
I have a real affinity for just a group of like friends getting together and just making a thing that they want to make. Like I have a lot of um, like respect for that, and I've been there and I've been involved with that, and when I see it, I think like great, like you went out and you made something for you, and thousands maybe of people have watched it, and that appeals to me, that idea of no budget filmmaking, and Nekromantik is very definitely an example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone who doesn't know, Jörg Buchereit, or Jörg Buchereit, I'm not totally sure how you're supposed to say it. He is a German director who was born in Berlin, I believe, still lives there, and is around where he made these movies. And like you said, this is definitely a zero budget film, although there apparently we do see real animal intestines, and I believe pig eyeballs were used. So it definitely does not skimp on the effects. And as far as its legacy, it only recently, well, semi recently, got certified by the British Board of Film Certification in 2014. And apparently it's still banned in countries like Finland, New Zealand, Iceland, Malaysia, some Canadian provinces. And I think this is seems to me like a movie that is inspired by the whole video nasty craze. That actually is mentioned at one point in the film. There's a news report or a TV program or something where they talk about kids watching video nasties. And I guess this particular one didn't actually make the real list that it was the actual like video nasty origin, like where that term actually comes from, but it
Boy, what's a body
definitely
got to
feels
do,
of a
you
piece
know?
with them.
Well, the second one, Necromantic 2, which is
Mhm.
by all accounts like a more polished production, is because I think it was a more polished production, actually garnered the attention of the crowd in the UK, particularly in the late 80s, early 90s, that were um, promoting this idea of the video nasty. And yeah, the BBFC, I think, based on Necromantic 2, went back to look at Necromantic, the first movie, and ended up incorporating it into this group of video nasty movies. But it sort of flew under the radar for a few years, um, until there had been like enough attention garnered from it to mean that the second release was more in the public awareness.
Yeah, when I was younger and used to go through like the horror aisles at video stores, back when it was VHS tapes and everything, I would see a lot of these movies that are considered video nasties, and the Faces of Death and Mondo Kane movies, and I mean, there's a whole big long list of them, but I never saw Necromantic around. So maybe that was that's partially why it was a little more obscure, and I don't know, maybe this really was just more extreme or disgusting that even like the little video stores, at least in the US, didn't have them when they would have all this other messed up stuff.
Yeah, I can't imagine ever seeing it in
Mhm.
like my local video store for sure. Like, and I found plenty of stuff when I was a kid that I shouldn't be watching in my local video store, but I didn't come
Mhm.
across this until I was a grown human being.
You'd have to grab it and sell it on the internet. It's gotta be like VHS of this, man.
They
I
are
doubt. I don't know.
like they are re-releasing a VHS of this
Of course they are. Oh yes. The
because
only way. See that
everything old
HD
is new
rip you
again.
watched? Not right. Not correct.
Yeah, right.
Blu-ray.
Well, that's the kind of movie that should be re-released on VHS if they're going to do it. No one needs Avatar on VHS, but this movie I think would probably fit in. But I want to take everybody through the plot of this because there's not much going on, but there also is a lot going on depending how you look at it. But the movie's main character is Rob, who works with Joe's cleaning agency. Apparently, I don't know if this is a German thing. seems to be called out to crime scenes to clean them up. Basically,
Right.
sometimes it seems like they before the cops even get to it.
Yeah, you wonder how accurate it is or how much of it is like exaggerated in a like almost like a Kurt Vonnegut sort of way.
Because in the beginning they show up with to this car wreck that we see happen, which somehow manages, even though it's just two people inside a car who, I don't know, crash into something, somehow covers the outside of the car completely drenched with blood, and then somebody's torso is far away from the car.
The wrong
What?
direction that the torso probably would have gone. So it's really a miraculous thing to witness and ponder as to how it could have occurred.
Yeah, and
Really,
I have to
really a
wonder.
miracle at the beginning of the film that
And
we're
we never find
witnessing.
out what happens to the legs, so they could
Oh
be
yeah,
anywhere.
You're right; those are unaccounted for. It's just the torso. And I have to question the hygiene and best practices, maybe, of this company, because they seem to do a lot of just picking up entrails with their bare hands and walking around with their blood spattered suits, even when they come home in them. Uh, but that's all beside the point. But Rob lives at home with his girlfriend, who, they share an apartment full of jars of organs and body parts. It just proves that there really is someone out there for everyone because they do
wrong.
share these same interests. His
There it
girlfriend
is.
takes a
The
nice
title
literal
starts
bloodbath every
dissolving.
once in a while.
Yep. Oh yeah.
It, and one day, Rob basically takes home a dead body, and we're treated to a three-way, a threesome between him, the corpse, and his girlfriend. And to make a long story short, we can, tackle each of these scenes individually, but he eventually loses his job, and that is where that's where she draws the line and gets upset and ends up leaving him, takes the corpse with her,
Yeah.
and the rest of the film is kind of following Rob around as he kind of meanders, doing different things, going to the movies, getting a prostitute. And then we will definitely talk about the climax, no pun intended, of where everything ends up here.
Mm.
But why don't we talk about that three-way? Because I think that's probably this film's
Let's
calling
talk
card,
about that
right?
three-way. Oh
Uh,
yeah, that's where the romantic comedy begins, really, of this movie. With a capital
yeah,
K. Yeah.
when I saw them kind of sawing off this steel pipe and then affixing it to the corpse to form a phallus and then putting a condom on it, I thought that was a really great endorsement for safe sex. And I was just glad that we didn't necessarily see the pipe in action, unless I missed something.
It's pretty demure. Like when it when it
Mm.
comes to the, I'm just gonna see how many times I can use the phrase corpse fucking in like the next hour or so. Um,
I'm
We'll
when
counting
it
start.
down.
We'll
comes
ring a bell every time you say it and keep a counter.
when it
All
comes
those
to the
angels
corpse
getting their
fucking,
wings.
it's a pretty classy like affair. That you we're not we are it it is blander than softcore. Like it is very very safe. I don't want to say like safe sex. It is a safe depiction of sex. It is not hardcore. It is not um, invasive. And it's kind of romantic in terms of the way that it's filmed. I don't want to say I found it romantic, but it like it's very gentle the way that the depiction of corpse fucking is presented in the movie, which it is kind of, you would think that that was antithetical to what Butgerite was going for with the rest of the movie. But no, he's really interested in the romantic side of this three way, which is just mind boggling.
And they are like there's like soft dissolves, like there's romantic music, like the whole movie has this crazy synthesizer soundtrack, and the music is very romantic. And you would think that would make it just simple, like gross out comedy, but I still feel like it is not as simple as that, which is really like I don't know if what the word is, the power of that sequence lies is like it still is it still remains obviously gross, obviously kind of funny, but not all one or the other. There's still like this element of just like I still do feel like I'm watching something I shouldn't. Like there's still something like telling me that like this is like this is not just a funny little thing, and like there is like this like feeling that I've wandered into something that is like almost made for people who like this. Like it reminds me of like watching certain parts of the movie Crash by Cronenberg, where you're like
Right?
you almost
Yeah.
get the idea that like this is maybe made for these people that I just haven't encountered before that are into fucking like next to accidents and with people who have been charred in accidents or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
They're filmed like normal sex scenes, but not necessarily in a way where you're meant to find the juxtaposition funny.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that's kind of what you're tapping into there.
Yeah, the humor runs out pretty quick, really. And eventually it is just like, oh, it is just happening. It's still going.
And it's very careful, like, not to condemn either Rob or his girlfriend for this act. Their problems don't stem from corpse fucking. Their problems stem from like them having a really toxic relationship with each other. And actually, this moment that we see in the movie is the closest that these two get. Um, in the course of the whole story, which is an interesting take. Like it is an interesting approach to like taboo breaking. Like the the um, taboos that your Budgeright is prodding at. He's prodding at them to say like they don't matter. Like what matters is like what's going on with these two characters. Like they have a relationship. They are together. They have this weird and gross and morally like uh, com- reprehensible kink. But that's not their problem. Like the kink isn't their problem. The problem is them. And I think that's an interesting look at how we deal with taboo. And I think that's interesting.
And let's be clear that they find these dead bodies through his work too. So it's not like they're murderers or anything, although he does end up killing a sex worker later on in the film when he's unable to perform with her, and then is able to perform once she is dead. Which does, I don't know, what did you guys make of that scene? I guess it's pretty obvious of what it's getting at, but it is showing that it is making things a little more specifically about necrophilia, like that is the only thing that can get him off. And his girlfriend is long gone at that point, which kind of surprised me for being something that seemed to be about their relationship at first. We never see the girlfriend again after she leaves.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. She's very much like, I'm gonna go find some other corpse daddy who's gonna bring me all the corpses I want, who has a job that allows us to
yeah.
get corpses.
I like corpse daddy. I think that's a good. I'm gonna put that in my dictionary. Thank you very much for
Oh, it's
corpse daddy.
commonly used in the necrophile scene, you know, the underground scene. If you ever frequent it, I'm sure you do. Um,
Yeah, I have an account on Corpse Daddy and the app on my phone. It's a great place to meet people.
everybody's
I
super
need
nice.
I need to try that. I've been stuck on Corpser and it is just nothing. It's useless.
Mhm.
Corpse.
Yeah, you swipe down instead of left, but it's very similar. So yeah, but and I definitely want to get across that this is a pretty gross movie, even though that scene is shot in that particular way. What you're still seeing is, they're sucking on the gooey eyeball in the corpse, and there's a I think maybe the crux of this movie that might actually be the test of whether or not you're along for the ride and how you interpret it is when the animal cruelty starts. So
Ding ding.
Seth and I were watching this together, and as soon as we saw this bunny come on
We
screen,
were
there's
like, oh, this ain't
basically
so bad. What? What's everybody talking about?
There's basically a sequence that intercuts a rabbit being killed and slaughtered, butchered, basically, in what seems like a very normal way for people who do that kind of thing. You know, it's like documentary footage,
It
basically,
seems
is
like
what
a
it looks
farm.
like.
They're on a farm or something.
Yeah, and it's intercut with Rob performing an autopsy. So I'm not sure if he was trying to get at some kind of a juxtaposition there, but you do see a little cute alive bunny be killed on screen, and Seth and I immediately like turned our heads and we're just kind of using our peripheral vision and being like, "Do you think it's safe to look back yet?" Because that is just viscerally where I draw the line,
But your
and
perverted ass cats kept staring.
oh, my cats
They did
loved it.
not flinch.
Cats, yeah, had no problem with it, but don't worry, they got theirs too once the cat shows up.
Oh no, it was rough. That is it.
Yeah.
Just like because you just think it's over, and they cut back to the autopsy sequence, which is you can at least compartmentalize. Like, okay, it's not a real arm, and then bam, it's like, oh, no, no, there's more to do to the rabbit. It's still being cut up and things, and
I think, yeah, I would agree. I think strangely for a movie about necrophilia, the hardest scene in the movie is that first depiction of the butchering of the rabbit. And I don't know. I think that we're meant to think that this is a memory that Rob is having
interesting.
while he's cutting up, while he's performing this autopsy. That this is what led him to this life. Um, but I kind of find it uh, almost indefensible, like the in terms of the depiction of animal slaughter. I think it is too much, and when um, when people talk to Jörg about his decision to include the death of the rabbit in the movie, he quite often springs immediately to the defense of this is a real rabbit farm. We didn't kill
Mm-hmm.
it for the movie. We are just showing what happens at a rabbit farm. Um, and for me, that lands just only a couple of steps away from, I guess, what you could call the Deodato defense from the Italian director when he was directing Cannibal Holocaust and Lost in a Cannibal World and these cannibal cycle movies that always depicted animal cruelty and always, when challenged about it, the answer would be, well, the natives eat these animals anyway, and we just gave them the animals, and the only animals that we show being killed are the animals that are going to be killed anyway. And you just have to get to the point where you say, yeah, but you don't have to show it. Like, your decision is to show it, and your decision is to lay that on your audience, and you've got to have a really fucking good reason to show an audience an animal being skinned as part of your movie that essentially is for entertainment. And I think a lot of people have a lot of trouble swallowing that, and I'm one of those people. I'm a defender, I guess, of Necromantic as a piece of work, but every time that scene comes up on screen, I have to look away. I can't face it. I can't watch it.
It definitely like the intention is in question because it would be one thing if it felt like there was something there that was like of greater significance or greater artistic endeavor uh, being attempted, but it really does feel like just 90s edgy punk rock, like just which at the movie's worst parts, it is just doing that, like regardless whether it's the bunny scene or other like grotesqueries in it. Like maybe at its most base level, it is just being like a shocking, like kind of just trying to scare your grandma kind of thing. But at its best, it has like more going on where there is like let's go back to the corpse fucking. We already said the word again. Is actually giving
Ding.
us something that we just haven't seen, and it is like presenting it in a strange sort of how do I take this sort of way. There's an interesting dynamic going on with the audience, whereas like this is very plain and very just like blunt instrument, like this is gonna hurt him, I'm gonna throw that in there.
Yeah, it does feel like there's an aspect of kind of rubbing your face in it, which is something I felt a few different times in this movie. And I don't want to sound like a hypocrite. Like I'm a meat eater. I understand that this is the how people make their living and livelihoods and stuff like that. But when you do put that into a movie, it's going to have an effect on the tone of the whole thing. And I guess I'm not sure if we're supposed to find any of this movie to be fun in a transgressive, gross kind of way. I don't think there's a lot of overt dark humor in it or anything. But there are weird things like there's two different. I mean, the opening of the film is a lady like dropping her underwear on the ground and peeing like in close up, basically, with at least seeing like the pee hitting the ground, and that's followed up not long after with another close up shot of a character peeing into a urinal, both completely gratuitous. And that's another aspect of this kind of I don't know geek show aspect of the film. And but once you see something like the rabbit happening, if there was any kind of fun just with looking at the effects and stuff, I think it does interfere with that. I know that it kind of killed the mood in the room for us, uh, and
Yeah.
certainly then when the cat showed up, I was very queasy at that point of oh my god, like if I see this cat actually get killed now, I'm shutting this thing off. Luckily, even though it does die, it is definitely simulated. Just for
Yes.
anyone curious, the cat is trapped in a bag and then beaten on the ground until it dies. And then I think, I don't know, kind of cuts out its intestines or guts and is smearing it on himself in the bathtub. I guess,
Yes.
everyone has their ways of grieving a relationship.
Mm-hmm. We've
But
all been
so
there.
but that scene could definitely be hard to watch too, even though compared to
Yeah.
the rabbit one, you at least have the comfort of saying, okay, finally
I
I'm
mean,
seeing something fake.
Yeah.
I think I could only say that that it was easier because I was like, well, all right, it's at least simulated. But I like if the rabbit scene hadn't been there, I think it would have been even more shocking. Still, I think I was just dulled, like because it is,
Right.
which it is like the first movie in a while that I really felt that sort of like numbing sensation that comes from like when you're, I don't know, it reminds me of like being a little kid and like wandering into a movie that's maybe way over my head or something like that, of like just watching like Friday the 13th as a younger kid or something like that. This is how this felt for me, of just like this, like my brain can't doesn't even know what to do with what it's getting, and it is getting duller and like more and more
But I
numb to it all.
I find that like interesting in terms of the way that it watching it, this was the third time I've seen it for this podcast, but watching it for a third time, it felt so intentionally desensitizing, um, because this is a film with a tight like 85-minute runtime or something. This is a short movie,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God.
and you thank God.
Yeah.
But they spend maybe 15 minutes on the first cleanup of the car accident at the beginning, and that feels like it's purposefully there to be like, here's one kind of disgusting, um, gory death. Get used to this. Spend some time getting used to this. Now here's an animal death. Spend some time getting used to this, and now we will get to like the corpse fucking. Like it is like setting you up for like desensitize you, desensitize you, desensitize you. Now you're in a position to watch this, one of the most transgressive acts that you can imagine.
No, it is wild the way it leads you around. I think that is an interesting sort of thing of just like, which is comparable to a lot of movies that are strange or just like even just weird drone sort of arty films. They are about like using the structure to maybe like uh, what is it? Like almost hypnotize or put you in a state of some sort. And that is what it feels like is going on here.
Yeah, it's weird because sometimes it seems like he has more control over that than others because
Yes.
there's goofiness to certain parts, and then something that's actually really bleak or disturbing. Case in point being when he does take this sex worker who starts laughing at him because he can't get it up for her, so he strangles her to death, then has sex with her body, and that's followed right away in the next morning with this cemetery worker or somebody coming up and finding them, and Rob grabs this plow or something and chops off the top half of his head, and
Yes.
you get this crazy effect of it falling down where you could see like just the half of the head with the guy's like tongue sticking out.
There's a great little like Muppet hand that goes on at the same time, which makes me laugh every like maybe I should
Mm-hmm.
laugh, but the it's so it's so goofy. The like writhing hand while you can just see this like fake tongue lolling about. It's yeah.
But
Yeah, and then like
even
all of a
that
sudden
scene,
then it is like at that point it's like a Friday the 13th film, you know.
but even in that scene, it is interesting that it like for a second it does feel like Friday the 13th, or even like a like early Peter Jackson kind of thing going on. Uh, but the way it lingers on that like jaw that is just fucked up, uh, still kind of tracks with the rest of the movie in that it still like feels like it belongs here in this like whatever this you want to call it, a study or whatever it is, in just like staring and lingering and ruminating rather than just like how it is in a slasher movie where it's just like boom, like get an effect out of you, move on to the next one, get an effect out of you. There is more of this sort of like you're meant to look, you're meant to ogle, you're meant to sort of linger. um, but yeah, it does kind of ride this very fine line, and sometimes it works, and I think it's probably like depends on the audience member which one like kind of which scene does what. But I do think like certain scenes do fall into like kind of like just more of a unintentional feeling like cartoonishness, where the other ones feel more like filled with that dread, that are just like continuing that really morbid, to create that really morbid zone.
Yeah, there's times when it really does seem just cheap and ramshackle. Where you have like especially this chintzy like synth score that we get throughout, which sounds like a preset on a
Yeah,
keyboard or something.
it's really
But then
bombastic too.
yeah, it's a very budget sounding score. At the same time, there were a few shots where I could tell that the director had something going on in a way that was a little more competent than a lot of the video nasties I think that it's trying to evoke. I remember one shot that I remember is when him dropping a eyeball that he got from somewhere into a jar, and his face is behind the jar, like all distorted while the eyeball is slowly sinking down. And there are times in the film where there's this kind of a mood that's established. And I think some of the effects are pretty good too for having no budget. So I feel like I only got glimpses of it, but there is a seed here that I think would blossom more fully in the Death King later on, as far as like, okay, well, maybe this guy does know a little bit about what he's doing behind the camera.
I think it's in like the thing that tips it over the edge for like um, intentional versus like amateurish is in the contextual details for the movie, because it was a movie that the authorities of a few European countries tried to track down to confiscate. And I know in a screening of the movie in Oslo, um, it, this movie was only ever screened at like rock shows. Like it was never screened in a cinema. It was only ever screened at like you are you're there for like the heaviest music, and now here's a movie afterwards.
Hmm.
And the authorities came in to confiscate this movie on the understanding that it was a movie that depicted necrophilia, and Butgereit argued with the police as they were trying to take the movie from his hands to say, like, you show movies where people get shot all the time. Like, why that that's illegal in Norway. Necrophilia is illegal in Norway, but showing necrophilia it surely is on the same level as showing someone get shot, which is cheeky and not at all like a one-to-one comparison. But it kind of shows the thought process behind the movie, which is that like we just take death in movies for granted, and we are okay with it. Um, and you mix that with sex, the other fundamental of life, pretty much, and that is a point when higher authorities get involved to take it off you, and the arbitrary line being drawn, I think, is the interest of the movie. Um, but the fact that that has to come across in the contextual information and maybe isn't there in the content of the movie itself, it is kind of testament to how it is just kind of slapped together by some guys who just wanted to make a movie.
Yeah, but I do think some of that does rise to the surface, at least in its like frank nature of some of the ways the things are presented. And again, in that in a way that I feel like I only really see in various movies. I think this is like there's a short list of movies that I could really compare to the way that this approaches gore, or at least specific scenes that do count and go a long way. I think like again like the corpse fucking scene and other instances in the movie just do feel like they are like just trying to present them in a way that is, I don't know, like almost like they again like are seen as not so transgressive even, or like in a weird sort of way that they are just like this is coming from some other alternate place where this is one of many movies like this or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
and it definitely goes down that route before Rob brings the corpse home. There is a scene of him going to the cinema in which he watches a film where somebody is raped and killed, and in that scene, the audience are either ignoring it or enjoying it. Like there's one guy just smiling in the corner and taking notes, which is really creepy, and um, it's kind of it knows what it's doing. It's going there to say people are in this cinema. This cinema is packed out for this entertainment, which is um, rape and murder, which 70s and 80s absolutely was a blossoming genre of cinema.
But that
And
scene is really interesting in the arbitrary nature of it, because I personally saw it as this like the movie was almost beside the point that he was watching, which I was like waiting for like, oh, okay, this is just like the easy like, oh, violence in movies, this is what we're talking about. But like the actual central like tension of the movie was still at the forefront, which is like he's looking around and he sees like a guy with his arm around a girl, and like even though like it's the craziest version of it, it is a story that is very old and known to us, which is just like a guy who's lonely and he just got dumped and he misses his girlfriend every which way he looks. He just keeps seeing happy couples, which is just like, yeah, again, like a romantic comedy trope,
yeah,
which I loved about it. And it didn't feel just low hanging fruit of like, haha, we're getting that tension there. It did feel like it's like honestly like I'm supposed to have some empathy for him having heartache.
yeah, for sure.
I'm glad that we're talking about this scene too, because this was the one time that I really felt like I could feel some kind of intent going on, which I think is more of the exception than the rule in this movie. But it does seem to be doing something interesting there, which you can interpret in a couple of different ways. Where we've seen him doing all of this depraved stuff involving dead bodies and sex. And now here he is in a mainstream theater where all the so-called normal people are watching a sexual assault and a murder on the screen, and you see couples embracing during it, and they seem to be being titillated by it. And you could see that as a comparison about how normal people will sublimate maybe their own sadism by watching things like that. You could look at it as him not being enough for him, like he doesn't have those boundaries and he needs more himself to actually get off. Or it could
What
even be kind of pointing it back at the you think about, well, I'm sitting here watching this movie just like this audience is watching a similarly violent movie, and maybe I'm being disgusted by it and judgmental towards the character. But then again, why? It's like the movie saying, oh, why are you watching this then if you're so much better than this guy? I don't think it necessarily spells out exactly what you're supposed to take away from it in the context of the movie as a whole, but there's definitely something there about comparing his perversity to the more socially accepted kind.
Yeah, and I
or if there
think
is some sort of like almost just emphasis of the absurd world that he lives in too, which I kind of felt in that like maybe it's not that like this is like a normal world, maybe it's like this exaggerated almost sci-fi thing where like there's bunch of people that are starting to get more and more. This is like an evil trend, like hell in a handbasket kind of thing. That like they're getting titillated by these images of violence, like literal in a literal sense. And he's just a further along version of it or something. That's
yeah,
just an aside.
I I I agree that it's like the most obvious statement of intent in the movie. Maybe barring the final moments, which are intercut with the a reverse shot of the death of the rabbit that you see before. I think that's probably the biggest like statement of intent. But this scene in the cinema is this violence in movies and titillation and what the audience wants is clearly his his like thesis point, which I think is fine. But I also, even as a I guess a defender of this movie, I think that it's like naive and disingenuous to say that this like super sexualized violence, like why does this get a pass when at that very moment it was not getting a pass, it was getting banned all across Europe, and so I think the point that is trying to be made by the film at the time that it was made, like maybe now we could look at it and say this is a reasonable thing to say, that like people love to go and see these revenge fantasies, and people love to go and see these torturous movies. Um, maybe that was more true like 20 years ago or early 2000s,
You can
or what have you.
psychologize them.
You absolutely can. I think when this movie came out, we were in a very puritanical way, both in Europe and I think in the US, that like this stuff was being hit upon by mothers everywhere trying to protect their children. So I think to say like, oh, people want to see this and this gets a pass, is like it doesn't get a pass. And to suggest in your movie that it does, and that in this cultural moment people are good with it, is wrong. And you are saying that in order to make your point more effective, and I find that a bit manipulative, I guess, which is
Mhm.
not something that is not criticism that I would level at Der Todesking at all. I don't feel like that is a manipulative movie, but I think that the cinema scene in Nekromantik is twisting things to suit a kind of childish point that he's trying to make.
Right. Yeah, now that he's like spilled his drink, he's gonna like make some kind of big. Now he's gonna figure out some kind of way of explaining it away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
After the fact.
speaking of the big points, we should definitely talk about the climax of this film. Once again, no pun intended. But I mean, I have to make sure that everybody listening knows what it is, unless you're going to run out and see this movie. But it basically is showing Rob at the end masturbating graphically, a big prosthetic penis there, and he,
Huge.
yeah, he. What does he do? Does he kills himself while he's having an orgasm?
He stabs himself in the
Stabs
stomach
himself.
in
Right.
order to orgasm.
Yes, it makes him come.
There we go. Yes,
Yeah.
which he
And
does, and then blood starts squirting out as well. This is actually not the first film on this podcast with a blood-soaked cum shot in it, since we did do
our
Antichrist.
other favorite word other than corpse fucking,
Yep.
blood soaks cum shot. But yeah, our first episode was Antichrist, so it's great to be back here with a prosthetic penis shooting blood out. You know,
This is not uncharted territory for us. And this is also then intercut with the same rabbit footage, except it's being played in reverse until it comes back to life. And I don't know, what the hell is he trying to say with that move?
I
You don't
mean,
want to throw out your theories?
what have I got? I got
He's
like,
coming back to life by dying, maybe?
I mean, the problem that is him is going away, and therefore I don't know. There's some kind of, we are now rid of the ugliness of his desires, and which is shown in, we get the bunny back now we won't have to kill the bunny. I don't know. It's very I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
There's like a level of like the impossibility to it. To I don't know. I kind of see it as highlighting the fact that the undeath of something is not possible, and the sexual nature of Rob and his relationship with death is just not something that in the real world is possible. Like, let's show you something that is never gonna happen,
Interesting.
and this is as likely as this like depiction of necrophilia. Like death cannot be undone. There is no sexuality to death. It is just nonsense, and I guess that's kind of supported by how utterly stupid the blood-soaked cum shot is. It's just
No, I think there must be some humorous aspect to it, like it's
yeah.
intentional. Yes, at least in like the sheer over the topness.
I think at that I read that was basically the idea the whole movie started with, was that scene.
And then you
And
write a whole movie.
he just kind of built it around there. And then
How
this,
did he
we're
get
going to
here?
show this. But it's interesting because the Wikipedia page for this movie is ridiculous. There's this whole section of analysis of the themes. And it kind of reminded me of, I think it was Begotten, that we talked about many episodes
Mark,
ago.
this is where you're starting to go off down your path where I can't hear you anymore through the trees. I don't know. You've gone down a different path than me.
Well, I'll speak up for you.
Okay,
But
yell. What is that, Mark?
it just makes me wonder how much, I don't know, like, is the director himself making this Wikipedia page? Because it gets so kind of in-depth and scholarly about this movie and everything that it's exploring.
I would say no. Like, any time that Butgereit is spoken to about any of his movies, his comments are always along the lines of, "I look forward to when my movies come out so I can find out what they're about." So I don't think he has any of this. He you can read into it whatever you want to read into it, but he is there to make something that is gross and dumb, and maybe funny, and maybe says something, but really he's just there to make something that's gross and dumb and exploitative.
But that's exactly where I landed too with this, which is just why that Wikipedia page makes me laugh. And the same thing with Begotten. That has an even more epic thing about all of the themes and references and everything. And I'm just like, well, gee, I don't know. I saw a guy shooting a blood load all over his own face. That's what I saw. And, so yeah, I depends, but people definitely are going to dig into it. Maybe it says something that the director is just saying, oh yeah, have at it, whatever you think. That maybe these things weren't really necessarily planted there, but anybody who likes movies like this can certainly make an academic tome about it if they want to.
Well, to kick back against you because I love to do so. I just gotta
Please.
say I think it is just I mean, a way that you or I kind of differ in this way that it's I am attracted to that what seems like laziness. It's like it seems like a cop out for an artist to have that sort of like, and I don't know what it's about at the end of it necessarily, but there is something. It's a big school of thought for like abstract, like improvisational, like collage, and especially something dealing with sexuality quite often too, like the way like erotic film works quite often. And, like anytime someone finds something in those, it usually is like the author like is probably operating at some sort of like less in like artful intensive way, like academic way. It's probably more like, I don't want to use the word like channeling something, but he
It's
is
intuitive.
yeah, it's intuitive, and it's
Yeah.
more, yeah, he's feeling around because he's trying to open himself up and be as like honest as possible, and therefore he like, but you can't be like constantly being cognitive of every little step and what it means.
I think the word juvenile comes up a lot when discussing directors who are like button pushers.
Which I think that's there, but
Yeah, and I know it's something that I've heard you guys say before, like about both like Gaspar Noé and Harmony Korine, and like it's there's kind of like a derogatory implication there most of the time to, and rightly so, you know, like there's a hand in hand there with pretension or edge lordiness, and I think I would call Necromantic juvenile, but I would kind of mean it as a compliment, like maybe because the creatives were part of this like, I don't know, cowpunky German like new wave scene, and it's kind of got like the blood of British punk cinema in it, like that refusal to fully take serious things seriously, um, and to me it's kind of appealingly childish. And this final scene, the the climax.
the blood soaked cum
Yeah,
shot.
the blood soaked cum shot following the corpse fucking is appealingly childish, and it's when I saw it this most recent time, I was put in mind of like a halfway point between like Derek Jarman's Jubilee and like Tim and Eric. Like there, I said it right. Like it is absurd refusal to take established ideas seriously. And that I find appealing. And I know it's dumb. And I think that the ideas behind it are, like I said, naive at the best of times. Um, but I can kind of see myself in that mindset. Like when I was, I don't know, 21 or 22 or what have you, and like feeling like I'm gonna say something about that things that people watch. People watch terrible things, and I'm gonna say something about that. And it's not gonna be interesting, and it's not gonna be original, and it's not gonna be thoughtful. But I'm gonna say something about it. And I see Necromantic, and I think good on you, child, for thinking that you had something interesting to say.
And I actually
Audacity.
agree with
Yeah.
what both of you are saying to a large extent. And certainly something being juvenile can be pushed to, a movie like Freddy Got Fingered that we talked about that, I think that's the whole point of it. And that wouldn't work without that sensibility. And it's more of just if you were to go in and read through the Wikipedia page and talking about the thematic depth of the movie, that maybe that's just not the right approach for this particular film. Is more what I was trying to say there.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you were reading a log line about it being this deep exploration of the link of sex and death and
Oh boy, would you
it
be
being a
disappointed,
relationship drama.
Yeah.
I don't think it really does much with those ideas
Sure.
on that level.
The important thing is to continually, as you're doing those things, remember like what you're saying and what you're doing, which is like you're not saying that the artist had this intention. Like it's that you are reading into this and you are finding something in it for yourself, which is totally valid.
Hmm.
But yes, that's yeah, the where you can go wrong is like, yeah, spinning it in this way that like, oh yes, this is clearly what he was doing here. You have like probably the wrong idea. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so I want to get everyone's final thoughts on this film. This will be the point where we can each decide if you would unwatch this movie. And I'll go ahead and start, then let Seth go, and then let Tom have the final word on that. So I think maybe the most disappointing thing for me is that I did see a lot of possibilities there, and I did go in with kind of the idea that this was going to be about a guy and his girlfriend who bring a corpse in as the third, basically, and who starts to get more attention than him, which I thought was is a pretty good premise that isn't really what this movie is about. She does end up leaving with the corpse, but it's because he lost his job, basically. So I can imagine like a really dark comedy that I would really like here that could be about relationships, whether it's, you know, jealousy of the bringing home a corpse that the girlfriend ends up preferring to you, or trying to win back the girlfriend by, you know, ultimately becoming a corpse yourself, or just the fact that where she draws the line with all of the sick shit that they're into is over like financial issues, uh, like any normal relationship might have to deal with, or even following up on the whole scene in the theater and him being around more normal people or trying to have relationships with them. So I could imagine a bunch of movies like that I think could succeed on that level. And what we get here is much simpler, and sometimes the fun is undercut by certain things, by how gross certain parts are, by, you know, the stuff that happens to animals. So without it really working on that level, or necessarily being, you know, creepy or provocative enough to actually get under my skin, it just kind of keeps me at a distance of regarding this as an object of some gross button pushing. And does have its own integrity to it from that perspective, but yeah, for me, not really my thing. So this comes pretty close to an potential unwatch for me. Actually, I did look away from the rabbit scene, so I guess I kind of unwatched some of it in real time.
When was the last time we did that? Like, uh, Gasper No, probably Gasper No episode. Been a while. I guess I would say, um, so Michael O'Malley on the podcast said he wanted to not unwatch it, but unmake something. I would never want to, um, as much as like I also have kind of like a soft unwatch on this because it just was like it did what it set out to do, which was like make me feel kind of ill and with like an unpleasant experience. The last thing I would do would be to unmake this movie, which I am like I think it's very fascinating as like an art object artifact out there, and definitely as a like sort of pinnacle at that point in culture. It almost feels like it's really hitting this gross out 90s zeitgeist that was really it's interesting that you said like it played it at rock shows and metal shows or something, because I just watched a documentary, Helvet. It's like a 3 hour black metal documentary that I liked quite a bit, which is definitely like it's that 90s Norwegian black metal scene where they are finally like, no, like we will officially be the grossest, like most evil people we can. Like this feels like it's in dialogue, like maybe not directly nor knowingly, but it's in that world. It also brought to mind. I really am a big fan of Dennis Cooper as an author. He's like sort of he's a huge uh, body of work anymore, but he's big on like gay transgression and like sex and death is his big thing, and like quite often he was like describing himself as a Jeffrey Dahmer who just didn't have the balls to do it or something, which it's I wonder if he's seen this. And I think the obvious thing to wonder, and I would love it if you knew anything about this, Tommy, if like did Jeff see this movie, because I feel like he would have had a much better time with this than on Return of the Jedi and Exorcist 3, like he was making his victims watch or whatever. I heard that that's what he was doing. He should, maybe he just could have watched Necromantic and known that there's more people out there like him. I don't know. But
Yeah, he could have gotten his release
yeah,
elsewhere.
I thought about him a lot throughout the movie, and that was like one of the most disturbing parts of it. Really, was like it's very easy to see it as this like absurd gesture and like borderline comedic gesture until you like remember that like very soon like Jeffrey Dahmer would be arrested actually like the next year, and we would become very like if it was always a thing, but we would become more cognizant of the fact that there are people out there that are into this and are like would do this and yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's not just a joke anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's for me it like I said, I'm kind of a defender of this movie, but there are elements of it that I would always unwatch. I don't think that the depiction of the animal death in it is important enough to be shown in such graphic detail. I don't think it has as profound an effect on the movie as it would need to in order to justify being in there. And the thing that saves me from saying that I would unwatch it is that it is at the very least not like nihilistic. It is not cynical. It is not there to um, piss people off. Basically, it's quite a gentle movie in terms of its attitude to um, letting people like what they like. As extreme as it is in that, no one is condemned in the movie, and it's not setting out to make you angry. Um, and that would be the line for me if it was just edge lord bullshit of like I'm going to show you the worst thing you can imagine, and it's not that, and that kind of saves it for me. So I would not unwatch it.
All right, definitely no kink shaming in this movie.
Right.
And this is a sex positive podcast, so
Although while we were watching Necromantic, like Mark and I were like, we're just like, oh man, like this is how I feel like a homophobe watching gay porn or something. I'm just like, ugh, I hate them corpse fuckers. Ugh, can you believe it? These kids these days, Jesus Christ, the things they're up to.
this is always a first date movie for me. I think it sets the mood quite
Yeah.
well, and weeds out anyone that I don't want to associate myself with. So,
He is still single.
and yeah, that's why.
I would love to know what Dan Savage thinks about it. I think he'd have something said on it.
Oh fuck
You know what?
yeah.
I'm gonna write into him from the perspective of Rob and just describe the plot of this movie and come up with some clever acronym that that will be at the end, like CORPSE, and see what his advice would be. So, anyways, the next film that we're going to talk about is actually the director's follow-up to this. It was the next film that he made, which Tom has said a couple times is Der Todsking. Is that
Mhm.
which translates to the Death King? You could
Yeah.
find it, either way under either title, which is from 1990, and this is similar in some ways, but also very different. This is somewhere between an experimental film and an anthology film, I think. It's basically 7 vignettes that take place over the 7 days of the week, with not much connective tissue, no recurring characters, except for the general theme of just death, specifically suicide and
Suicide,
murder.
yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we do see people kill themselves, kill others, and this I think would be even more surprising to somebody who rented this at from the horror aisle or had seen Necromantic and went to check this out.
Well, yeah, I would say to anyone who's like ready to turn the podcast off and be like, okay, this guy is not for me, I would challenge you to, yeah, like Tommy said, like maybe start with this one and see where you're at. Um, and I can only imagine actually that I would, and if I ever get myself to watch Necromantic again, I would enjoy it more with the context of like knowing more about this director, which I feel like you do get a little bit more up close and personal, at least in his like aesthetics and his like I don't know, that you see that there is something more artful here if you were in doubt. Which yeah, me and Mark watched Necromantic, and Mark was immediately like, okay, well let's put the next one on. I was like, I'm going home. No, I'm going home tonight and I'll watch that eventually. But like, had I known what I was in for with the Death King, it would have been a kind of like a not cleansing experience because it's still disturbing in its own right, but it is, yeah, it is very different.
And this is the first one that you saw by him, right?
Yeah, right. So, like my first experience of this movie, like I said, was reading about it. I went through a stage of watching movies that were famous for like pushing boundaries or breaking taboos, or one way or another, and in doing so, I came across Ilsa, She Wolf of the SS, which is referenced in Der Todesking,
Yes.
and so I took a bit of a diversion and started looking into what this movie was instead. And I remember reading like a very basic description of it, like possibly even on Wikipedia, and being unnerved, like scared even by the description of it. Um, like, I don't think I'm the only one in this virtual room that has like quite a case of thick skin when it comes to particularly nasty like gore or extremity or whatever. But what does genuinely upset me every time is nihilism in movies, and particularly where there's like an obvious belligerence from the filmmaker. Like I said, I was kind of pleased that Necromantic didn't have that kind of belligerence. Um, I know you discussed like funny games before. That for me is like belligerence from the director plus nihilism equals I will never see that film again.
Yeah,
Um,
same,
yeah,
honestly.
yeah. Like a film where the more you think about it, the more you dislike the intention behind it. And reading the description of Der Todesking, that was my assumption of it, like that it was just a depiction of hopeless darkness and despair, and something that I would actively try to avoid putting into my life. And it wasn't until about like 10 years later, and actually survived my own suicide attempt. And in the months that it took for me to like psychologically recover from that state of mind, um, that's when I sort of revisited the idea of tackling it again. And it's funny because I built it up in my mind as something that was going to disturb me, um, but within that new context, there was a possibility of something that might also be like a mirror, or some sort of opportunity of working through trying to make sense of my own like prior disordered thinking. Um, and I guess spoilers, it doesn't do that. That's not at all where the value lies in this movie. Um, I absolutely do
Mm-hmm.
think it has value outside of whatever my personal hopes and fears and expectations of it were. Um, but that was sort of the space that I came to it from, like having been to the situation that some of these characters were supposedly in, and sort of hoping to find something of myself in the movie, and I didn't, but that's okay as well because what I found in the movie was interesting and spoke to me in a different way.
That's really interesting. First of all, I'm sorry that you had to go through that in your life, and this
We're
movie
glad
does
to
not
hear.
strike me as something that somebody who is going through something should be watching, because it definitely is. Yeah, it's not exactly inspiring. on
But
that
they
level. This is a pretty bleak movie.
Yeah.
but I'd say the thrust of it is this interesting dialogue with suicide, and almost like we could use the word again, almost like, even though it is intellectual, more intellectual feeling and more artful, it does feel juvenile in its
Yeah.
like reach of like creating. Again, I'm kind of spoiling the movie or whatever, but the Death King is like, it's like reaching for this mystical center of like, what is the cause of death, or what is the cause, who makes us die, who makes us want to commit suicide. And like, it's finding a boogeyman or something like that, which is almost like this cathartic exercise to try and find that, which is the connective tissue of like, why is all this happening, why does all this occur. And yeah, it's like, it's like this nice story to like reach towards, or just even like think about that, like, if we could just isolate it and pinpoint it to just it being this mysterious otherworldly figure. That it's interesting like that, almost like similar to like a atomic era 50s monster movies or something, where it's like, it's not just me being scared about the unknown of like death and nuclear apocalypse. It's, there's the spider, it's giant and it's coming at me, you know.
Yeah,
Does
there's
that make
one
sense?
vignette. Definitely, because there's one vignette in here where a lady gets like a chain letter in the mail, basically, that is encouraging people to kill themselves,
That too.
and making it this kind of a profound thing. And it's the only time we explicitly see that letter. We don't know if that's has anything to do with the other stories, unless I missed something. But the idea is out there, and I think it starts right with the very first episode on Monday, which I want to talk about because that was the moment where I was like, wow, this is not what I expected, or this is more ambitious than
Mm-hmm.
uh, other movies of this type. And it's not necessarily in what happens, because the first one is just a man who's preparing to commit suicide, writing a note, calling his job and quitting, and him just doing mundane tasks around the apartment. That's pretty much all that happens until he takes some pills in the bathtub and dies. But there's the big centerpiece is this rotating shot of his apartment, his single room apartment. It's an unbroken long shot, and every time that it passes the guy, it's later on, and he's doing something different. He's either eating, or he's burning something, or he's vacuuming, or he's in bed. And basically you're imagining, like, as soon as the camera rotates past him, he's running to his next position to get there, which is something that in a movie this low budget in this genre is not something that you would normally see. And I was right away like,
Beautiful.
oh wow, this is different. And there's all these close-ups of this goldfish that he keeps cutting to throughout. And at the end, instead of lingering on the guy's body in the bathtub, we see the goldfish slowly sinking to the bottom of the the bowl or whatever. And that was right when this movie like super had my attention. And we'll get to the other vignettes. I'm not necessarily sure that it always sustains that, but there are a couple things here that really got my attention, and it revealed this guy to be a quite good director.
Yeah, and there's a nice coming together just in that first vignette of we talked about in Necromantic, the score is kind of like chintzy, and it either sounds like a monster movie or like a daytime soap opera.
Mm.
But the score for Monday is just so haunting. As the camera rotates around, that the tune just gets lodged in my head, and I think it's true of none of the other vignettes necessarily, but the intercutting that happens between the vignettes. That as the vignettes go along, there is a um, shot of a corpse, fake corpse, slowly rotting, um, and the music that accompanies that as well is just really really interesting. And I think he had a different composer for this movie, because the first Necromantic had it was like a guy from a punk band. John Boy Walton, I think was the guy's name, who scored the first one, and he did some of the music
Hilarious
for.
name.
Yeah, yeah. He was in a band called the Waltons, which is just great.
Great.
But I think the Der Todesking was scored by Herman Kopp, and the difference in tone is and accomplishment in the score is so clear, and that really helps this depiction of a guy just doing normal stuff in preparation for ending his life. Like, got to keep the apartment cleaned, got to keep the fish fed, got to send off my suicide notes to whoever I'm writing them to. And it's just this mechanical thing, and the score kind of echoes that, like, repetitive, like, I guess fishbowl. Like, I guess that's what the vignette is. It's
Sure.
like this guy's life as a fishbowl.
And he
Well,
is
yeah,
like
there's like these
obsessed with
almost
fish too.
Gregorian chants
Yeah,
and dry strings and little keyboard tinkle. That yeah, definitely has that. And later on, there's this like really melancholy piano music in certain parts too. I
Yeah, it's like
definitely had
Eric
that same
Satie
thought.
or something. Um, and yeah, the music throughout the whole movie is really a centerpiece for me, and it really is the glue that works. Like, it was one of the things that combines them all. Like, again, like you said, the corpse that's rotting slowly throughout the time it takes to watch the movie that they return to. The music there is just, I don't know. There's something to those chosen chords and then a lot of the themes in this movie that point and really help with this atmosphere that I don't know how intentional it is or not, but it's this feeling that I need to keep looking because I'll miss something. There's like something that is being communicated to me that is like almost like secret information if I'm like reading the codes right or something. There's something about the mood here. Which again, like he even like the Death King, who is the Death King? Like I'm there's this like we're following a mystery of some sort. I don't know, like this filmmaker knows something that we don't, and I just love that feeling.
And then and that's why the next one that we get so Tuesday's segment, after the first one is really evoking the banality of death
Fish
in a
boy.
stylistic way. And the next one, we have this guy going to a video store and getting a Gestapo uh, horror movie or exploitation film, and we're treated to basically a fake video nasty within the video nasty, where we see a female Nazi torturing a guy and then graphically cutting off his penis with a pair of shears. And
and it takes a few
the
goes.
whiplash.
Those are blunt shears.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
they were not.
bummer.
It takes her a while. There was no practice. Uh, and then the guy's girlfriend comes home and starts nagging him, and he shoots her in the head.
And then that's a video nasty.
And then that turns out to be another movie within a movie. And so we've had this
Yeah,
total reverse of tone here from this first thing. I did get a kick out of the video store because it seems like they don't have anything organized in any particular way. So like Hannah and her sisters and Citizen Kane are right next to like Autopsy and all of these cheap horror movies
and Necromantic.
and
Yes,
Nekromantik itself.
Nekromantik's in there. It's apparently a real video store that they filmed, like a famous, or was famous in the 80s for being like the place in Berlin that you go to get a video nasty.
Right. And so that's that segment, and then into the next one where we got this rain-soaked guy in a suit on a park bench talking to a girl who he may or
Oh,
may
I
not know,
love that
telling
sequence.
he's like telling this long story about having a sex problem with his wife and then killing her. Then the girl pulls out a gun to shoot him, and it doesn't go off, and he takes it and shoots himself in the head, and then goes to the next thing. Uh, I don't know. These felt really different to me, almost like it didn't have a stinger to it that really made sense or went anywhere. But maybe you guys feel differently. Besides, when he does actually describe killing his wife, we get this weird effect that like the film is ripping and his
The
sound
film
pitches
breaks.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's haunting.
that is showing that there is a stylistic variety to each of these things. It seems like there's a particular idea or motif that is unique to each thing at the very least. That he keeps finding new ways to make them interesting.
Uh, I don't know. To use a overused word, vibe. It's just a vibe. I don't know. It's just continually being created and added to for me. Just like even in the silly Nazi thing, there's like this funny like punk rock music going. That's like you're almost getting to this point of levity, and then it goes back super dark with the what is it, Wednesday when
Yeah.
which is really somber. It's just a great image in itself, just watching this man next to a woman who has an umbrella, and the man is next to her and is just getting poured on by rain, and as he just but he doesn't give a shit. He's just going on this tangent about and revealing what it is that he has done. And this strange incident where every time he has sex with his wife, blood comes out of her, and it just escalates, and it kind of drives him mad. um, I don't know. These all like I love the connective like tissue of them that like we zero into a TV. Like it's this whole like little tiny universe that's going on, and it's
It,
all happening at once, kind of, which is a great,
I think,
interesting feeling.
yeah, it is, and the idea that like in that one specifically, that the woman pulls out the gun in order to punish this guy for killing his wife. She doesn't get to do that. That's beyond what's allowed by the movie. She doesn't get to punish him for killing his wife. He has to punish himself. And I think that while I'm not positive I could like verbalize why, what that means, or the significance of it, I think that's kind of powerful. That it, he has it's he wants to punish himself and he gets to punish himself, and yeah, like you say, it's a vibe, man.
Yeah, if nothing else, this does seem to be like a mood piece. If if maybe it leaves a, a lot to just speculate on as opposed to what the thesis is or how everything ties together, you definitely
Hmm.
can't argue with the atmosphere of everything. And actually, I think the boldest section in this movie is the next one. There's the whole segment that has nothing, no people in it at all, and is just all of these roving shots of a bridge, and we start seeing all of these different names coming up, each with a name, an age, and a profession, just over and over. And it never explicitly tells you what these mean, I don't think.
No.
But the longer it goes on, what I just came to assume is that it seems like these are the names of real people who have jumped off this bridge. Given what we see in all the rest of the movie, that was where my mind immediately went. And that's all that there is to that segment. That just keeps going on, and there's lots of really nice shots, including a really good one that I think might be the best in the movie after the apartment rotating one. That's just a long shot. That's kind of the camera gliding over this part of the bridge that has no bottom on it, so you can see way down to the ground below. And I'm actually not even sure how they shot it. I was kind of impressed because it looks like there wasn't an obvious place to put the camera. So maybe they had some kind of rig or something. Um, and I think a that was a pretty bold choice, and maybe the segment that I'll remember most about this.
Hmm. Yeah, it's I think that's true of the whole movie. Like the most affecting and the most effective like vignettes are the ones that are more abstract. And the bridge scenes particularly I find really moving, even though rationally I know from looking into it that all these names are made up. None of them are real people.
Oh, are
It
they?
no, it was a real suicide spot in Germany, but
Mm.
the names are invented. Um,
Hmm.
but it says something that this is like the most mundane thing, like the mundane, like it's just a lump of concrete when it comes down to it. But this it has this immense body count that's just reframed as like a tool of suicide. Like it's not poison, it's not hanging, it's not gunshot. It is just like a thing that everybody uses every day. It is universal. It has like an instant universality to it, and it doesn't even matter that the names are fake because you know that this is fundamentally true. Like you just have to think of something like the Golden Gate Bridge, where
Right.
they have so many suicide prevention methods that do not work, and people still go there, and it's the simplest that the director gets, and like the closest thing to accessible profundity that he achieves, which he will probably hate me for saying that, but that's how I feel about it. Like it feels profound watching it, but just because of
Yeah.
the yeah.
And just the fact that it doesn't tell you explicitly that that's what all these names are and everything,
Yeah,
I
the
think
slow
adds to it.
feel that slow feeling of it dawning on you while you watch it, because it takes I mean, it takes you a couple names to be like,
Mm-hmm.
now what is going on here? Are these like credits? Are these what is this leading up to? And then once you realize it's not leading up to anything, it slowly dawns on you what it is, and it is very haunting that moment where it clicks.
And especially juxtaposed with all of the other stories, which are either more conventional or sometimes goofy, that it's more powerful in this context than it would be just as its own 5 minute short. But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
one that's
It doesn't feel like sentimentally like suicide prevention or something. Yeah, like it would on its own. Feels more like with these other vignettes feels in tune with its weird world that it's and this weird mystery that again feels like needs to be solved and maybe can't be solved, that is death and suicide.
yeah, so that was where the movie was starting to get me back again, as far as it being something really interesting. One of my least favorite ones is the one that's right after it that seems to be setting up a more conventional story with this lady who's in her apartment watching this couple through her window embracing, and she's the one who reads the suicide chain letter. She has some sort of a dream flashback to her walking in on her parents having sex when she's a little girl, and then
Mm-hmm.
eventually we find the couple to be dead. And I wasn't sure if we were supposed to assume that that was a suicide, or if maybe off screen this lady was stalking them or something. What did you guys think actually happened there? Was I off on that?
There's definitely like a stalking element there because she
Mm-hmm.
goes down to the apartment and she like
Mm-hmm.
listens into the door
Right.
at one point. Um,
You think
but
she
no,
killed them?
no,
I th-
I think you are like on the money. I think this is like the least successful of all of the vignettes in the movie because it just seems to float there. It seems to hang. Like the idea of the chain letter is kind of interesting and like because it appears that the chain letter was sent to everybody in the apartment and
Mm-hmm.
it didn't work on the woman, but it did work on this couple. And that they killed themselves possibly because of this letter. But it is not it doesn't hold together. It's not glued together. And the idea of like it's more about voyeurism than anything else. And kind of like unusually critical of this woman's kink. Like normally we are like no kink shaming
mm-hmm.
for Budgerites movies, no kink, but this feels kind of like kink shamey. Like she's
Mm.
voyeury and like her life is empty and hollow and she doesn't even get to kill herself. Like it feels misplaced. Like I I also don't don't really get it, I guess.
Go ahead and fuck a corpse, but no peeping. That's an invasion.
None of that. Yep. I don't know. I didn't have as much problem with that one because I was just caught up. I don't know.
Mhm.
I was just very caught up in the atmosphere. And I was like, more, more, more. And I love the like Eric Satie type music that's playing throughout the whole thing. Um, and yeah, I don't know. This again, it still flows with all of it because it does end with it being connective with the whole. Like we think it's not going to go that way, and then it does. Like um, in kind of a surprise way that the couple is the ones that are going to commit suicide.
So then after that, we get, I guess, just there's only two left, so we might as well just keep going in chronological order. But the Saturday, I think, is where things definitely change because there is, I don't believe, any element of suicide in this one, but it is quite striking because of the subject matter that now we're kind of watching this video reel that is being shot by some person is filming it themselves. And first we
A
have a
steady
girl, this,
cam.
yeah,
Mhm.
we do get a little bit of this lady kind of reading about the phenomenon of people killing other people along with themselves. And she says something like the mass murderer is the martyr of postmodernism. But then we just have this long sequence of her just strapping this camera device, which looks kind of like a steady cam basically, so that she's able to film while she takes a gun out. And we basically then see her walk in to a crowded concert, shoot people in the band, and start firing randomly into the crowd.
Like
And it's in
first
total,
person shooter. Yeah.
exactly, and it's in total silence, which I think is very effective. And it doesn't really go anywhere after that. So it still did seem a little slight to me, but it's impossible to watch that in, the way the climate is right now. Certainly, they had mass shootings that happened, back around the 90s, but certainly there weren't people, on Facebook Live broadcasting murders or holding their phone while they're doing it. So that's something that I think would play really disturbingly at the time, but seems prescient now, especially.
It does kind of the opposite thing of Necromantic as well, where like Necromantic is like pop culture does nothing to you. Pop culture does not make you a killer. Like watching people shoot other people does not make you want to shoot people, and to say so is stupid. But there are elements of this that kind of suggest the opposite because when she's strapping the rig to herself, she's looking in a mirror and she pulls the gun on herself, and the only thing I think of when I see that is Taxi Driver, and it's like she almost has been inspired by a culture of and glorification of mass killings to commit one herself, and it feels at odds with what what the director had kind of said before with his movies, and for that reason, it was kind of affecting for me. Like he's taking a different stance on this one.
Yeah, that these are gestures and these are big moments, and this is a um yeah, it being filmed is a whole other aspect, and that it's that it follows in it's in a tradition of some sort, that like that talk of it being the mass killer being the martyr or whatever, um is an idea that is out there and is like inspires plenty of people to do what they do, um and that ideas being out in the greater consciousness do influence people. Like that is an interesting thing to say, as much as like I sway the other way too, where it's like, video games are not what make people want to go out and kill people.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, it is complicated.
Yeah, I think that's what appeals to me about it because especially now when we can look at places like the mass shooting in New Zealand and the Manchester arena bombing in the UK, like it's not just like a gun crime problem. This is like a pop culture problem. It's like an internet problem, and even before that, back when this was made, it's like a public consciousness problem that these ideas of martyrdom are almost like mimetic, and that that is what I find really striking about this one.
I think maybe Scream said it best. With movies don't create psychos; they make psychos more creative, and
And it makes
it's all
them
floating around out there.
have to make strange arty anthology movies.
And speaking of that, did anyone get anything out of Sunday, which is basically just a guy writhing on a mattress and then on the floor and banging his head against a wall, and then it ends. And this is what's chosen as the final climactic day. And did anyone else find that underwhelming?
See, this for me felt like kind of a disappointment at the end of like what I did feel was a very complete um like blow for blow, like each of these days really getting to me, and even if like maybe they don't stand on their own, but in the greater context creating this weird maze of like thoughts that I had going on and atmospheres, where this one I feel like it was I could see it being a thing that he just like has at the end of his shoot, where it's just like, and then I'm gonna have so and so have like they're gonna do that freak out thing. They're gonna freak out in front of the camera. We're just gonna let it happen, and it's like it's not something that you can write. It's not something you can really prepare for, and like even after the fact, really I don't know add anything to compensate if it doesn't quite work. And I feel like it was like an exciting thing to write down, which it is like interesting to read the Wikipedia page of this movie again, like you did. I don't know if you were reading the Wikipedia page before you saw it, but like it is interesting to like go through, and it is like just a list of grotesqueries, which the movie is not once you actually watch it. Um, but I feel like it's one thing to write this ending, like it's just like, and a human just loses their mind and like bangs his head against the wall until he like succumbs to brain damage. But actually watching it, it just didn't really. I don't know, like and it having the added need. Maybe if it was like the fourth or third one, it could have held its own. But it having the added need to hold up. Like now it's Sunday, that means something. For me, it kind of didn't. I don't know. It's not like a total like I don't know. It didn't turn me off of the movie at all. I think, but it was a little bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, as a climax, it doesn't work. It's not. It isn't a climax. It is not. Is not a cap to the movie. Um, but having said that,
It's another one. You know,
yeah, it's
it's
just
another
another one.
day.
But I did find it um, one of the more moving vignettes. I because of its simplicity, I think, just because of everything else had like setup and story and context, and this is just like no, really, people who want to kill themselves are just in desperate pain all the time. They are
Mm.
they are they are just um, writhing in agony all the time, and they would do anything to end it. And as kind of like a statement piece, it was the closest to a real depiction, not through the method of suicide, but through the like the mindset of suicide. Um, that I kind of I saw it and I was like, this is just somebody who cannot live anymore, and that was the thing that like hit me about it. That it felt it felt so non-specific as to be specific to everybody with that like disordered thinking.
And it being that is interesting. It gives me a little bit more to go on. I feel like that there is its emphasis on it being a lonely, isolated incident too, which is like one of the hard things to swallow and tragic things about suicide. And in the context of all, yeah, like what you say, that is interesting, because in the context of the movie, everything else is like still movie scenes. Like there are characters, and we go from one room to another, and we cut. And this is like, I think there's maybe a couple cuts in the whole thing. Yeah, it is striking in that way.
Well, that's the question I guess I'm going to ask everybody as we give our final thoughts here then. Since it does end on that note, the movie itself, what is it that you think ties this movie together? Is it about suicide? How would you describe it? And then I don't think it sounds like you guys definitely don't want to unwatch this, but this is where we would normally do that part. I'll still start us off here because I also would not unwatch this one. I found it to be much more interesting than Necromantic, and at least on a visual and visceral level. And there's some things from it that I will remember. Um, Personally, maybe the fact that we do have these different some vignettes in there that have nothing to do with suicide. That to me, the ideas in each one still remained a little too disparate. That there wasn't that much of a unified perspective beyond, here's some death, here's some more death, and the different forms that it takes, which is a little too broad maybe for me. And maybe the fact that most of them don't stand on their own as self-contained shorts, and there are more than a few that I think kind of either end before they really get started or have some kind of twist or something that doesn't end up really following through. So I would have liked it more if it came together in some kind of a way like that. That was my main hesitation about it, is that there were some kind of wasted opportunities to me. That said, as a mood piece, it definitely leaves an impression, and there's no animal cruelty or sex with corpses, which is something a lot of my favorite movies have in
It's
common, I guess.
You don't see that. Yeah, there's not enough
Yeah,
movies like that anymore.
yeah, that's if you letterbox all my reviews mention whether or not there's animal cruelty or sex with corpses in them, and this is in
Corpse
the
That's
fucking.
no column.
this is why we hate Avatar too, because of all the animal cruelty and
Oh yeah,
sex with
awful,
corpses. Just
awful.
terrible.
Those
Yeah, I
poor
do not
blue
approve.
people.
Yeah, just blue corpses. So, anyways, Seth, what are your final thoughts?
I uh, I kind of wound up loving this movie. I had no idea that it
Sicko.
existed. Yeah, all right.
Okay.
I am. I'm coming out. Um, but yeah, I don't know. This is my favorite kind of. I don't know. One of my favorite kinds of movies that are these like. And I didn't even think of it being an anthology movie until you mentioned it, really, because I feel like that could have. I don't know if it went too heavy handed on that aspect of it. It could have felt a little bit just like uh, what is it, Crypt Keeper or something like that, or just like
Right.
Twilight Zone, or a series of Twilight Zone episodes in a row, or just like, and ooh, creepy, creepy. Oh, that one was creepy too. Like it for me, they really do hang together as like a piece, and I am an eye going from one room to the next, and going from one day to the next. And it is interesting as like I'm jerked around and pulled around to different places. The movie itself, like the structure, again feels less like anthology and more like, to use like to go into like the thematic element, it feels like the movie is constantly committing suicide, sometimes literally. Like it's the movie is starting and it's introducing like what could be like a plot line or something like that, and then is cut down and we zoom into a TV and go to a different place all of a sudden. um, and I would like to get some feedback about like what you guys think about the Death King himself and what that means, because that was again like that's like the central object at the black hole of this weird maze for me, which everything is still like confusing, and once I return to it I still won't have clarity. But the feeling is that like there is a center that is known, which is somehow this strange entity called the Death King. that may have something to do with why we all die and like can go to such awful lengths like suicide or hurt each other in mass killings and things like that, that all this is somehow linked to something mystical, which is like old as shit, like seeing death and suicide as this like it's the other world, it's from it's like crossing the threshold shit, right? So that is like very palpable here, that we're going into either and it plays with that because it both plays with the feeling of it being this mystical thing, and also it being this like more nihilistic idea of it being like this, like maybe there isn't really anything here, maybe it is just us, maybe it is very clinical and it's cold and it is just a person in a room like dying. I don't know. But yeah, what do you guys think of the Death King? Is there any thoughts on the Death King, real quick?
I think he is, because the way that he's presented in the movie is almost, you get like a childish doodle of the Death King, and then you get the little girl explaining to somebody what the Death King is, and she just says, oh, he's just a guy that makes people not want to live anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and put into the mouth of a child kind of like seals the deal for me of like, this is wrong. This is the wrong way to look at suicide. It is not this external force, but it is something that is within people. Like, the idea that to externalize it is a childish
Mm.
idea.
Mm.
But then at the very end, it goes back to show like a still image of a guy who is ostensibly the Death King. So that kind of undermines that idea.
It's
Um,
tugging back and forth, which I think is
yeah,
interesting. That
yeah,
I'm glad it continues to not land.
yeah.
Yeah, and luckily I already said my final thoughts because I don't really have any about the Death King. I think that's probably the best reading you could bring to it. It was just a question mark for me at the end, like who is this guy in this picture
Mm-hmm.
with like a baby at his feet or something?
You have to
And
watch it 60 times and then you'll get it.
yeah, so well, yeah, what are your final thoughts then, Tom?
Uh, it's kind of, as I mentioned earlier, like an important movie for me thematically, and I really appreciate the depth of thought that is put into all the many ways in which, you know suicide comes to people, like through monotony, or through social or relationship trouble, or through, um, just like, mundanity, or and I like that. I like that a lot, and um, it is not. It's a film that leaves you with a lingering bleakness, um, and I think that's a big impression to leave with someone. Um, not like, you don't leave the movie thinking, I just watched a movie. You leave the movie thinking about the things that the movie is about, and I, you've got to admire that, and especially in the hands of, um, someone who just had an idea and no money, and a group of guys that, they were making a film with.
I'm glad you're bringing that up. Yeah, that's something that I kept forgetting to bring up. That is like that is another aspect of this that is just really fascinating. The lo-fi quality of it, and the quality that it is like. This is not for some studio. This is not like a gig at all. Like it is the exact opposite. This is like a passion project, very clearly.
It's interesting that this guy has worked pretty sporadically since his I don't know his heyday, his spate of movies through the early '90s. It looks like there was a gap of several years where it looks like he didn't make anything, and then he just has some spotty credits after that. And I think if nothing else, this movie is evidence that, as a filmmaker, he had a lot of promise. So I don't know if we'll end up seeing more from him, or if we're only gonna every once in a while get some little contribution to something.
Do you know any others that you would suggest, Tom?
In terms of his work,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
no. So Necromantic 2 is a much more goofy, playful, absurd piece of cinema where a woman digs up the body of Rob and goes on to kill others in pursuit of sexual satisfaction, and it is way more obviously an exploitation movie, and it's more fun, but it is not more worthwhile. And yeah, and his final big movie I think was Shram, which is about the final moments of a serial killer who relives his life. Again, it leans really heavily into like the video nasty, grindhousey. What's the worst thing that we can show on screen? It has a couple of really neat visual touches, some of which were sort of I think trialed in the Death King. So um, in Sunday, the spinning shots that we have above the head that's replicated in Shram. Um, but I think this was the highlight of his career, and this was where he was in a position to to say something where he wasn't caught up in his own cult status that was garnered because of Necromantic. And I think it's a real shame that we didn't see more of this stuff from him.
Right, I could see fans of Necromantic going to this movie and being disappointed or something. Like
Yeah.
when somebody gonna go down on some dead penis, you know? Like what's going on here? This ain't funny.
Boy, if I had a dime every time I heard that.
Yeah.
And yeah, they. It sounds like he definitely has his pet subject matter, though.
Mm-hmm.
So no,
Mm-hmm.
no like historical dramas or musicals or anything lurking in that filmography.
Yeah, you can do
No.
it.
Okay.
The closest to his work is probably 2019, 2020, The Golden Handschuhe. Have you seen that? The Golden Glove?
No.
Yeah, super bleak, super interested in serial killing in Germany based on real events, and it's super exploitative. And I, it's not okay. It's not good. It's not a good movie. I don't think
Okay.
it's a good movie. Which I kind of think cements him as like right place, right time, right
Mm.
subject matter for this one movie.
Unrecommendables
Yeah.
with Tommy.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us this Tom and bringing your perspective to these, and for essentially making us watch these wonderful, fun frolics of a film. Is there anything that you want to plug or draw anybody's attention to, or anything coming up on AV forums?
Just go check out what we write about, because yeah, occasionally I like something that I see, and that's good. And tune into our podcast, which is on YouTube live every other Monday, second and fourth Monday of the month. Um, and you will just see a bunch of guys getting slightly blasted and talking about shitty stuff that we have watched over the month. So, like nothing amazing, but also please do go to the AV Forums Patreon, and they have Twitter. I don't have any social. I have no socials. I am not on the internet. I am not interested in being on the internet.
I'm
Um,
envious.
I have a Mastodon, which is Tommy Tidepool at mas.to. You can follow me there. But I only post sporadically because I hate the internet. I think that's about it. And yeah, just go watch some weird stuff.
I'm
Yes.
gonna do that. Thanks for making us watch some weird stuff that makes us smile and giggle. You know, just feel all warm inside, tickling us with cinema. You know, just tickling us.
Yep. So yeah, avforums.com. Best part, no animal cruelty, no sex with corpses.
Usually.
At least it's minimal. Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.